Today, we will focus on NASA's disasters on Stories of Crime World. It's NASA. Were they committing crimes? Leave your comments below. Subscribe to our channel for more stories. Space exploration has always looked clean. Fearless astronauts, bright rockets, American flags waving in the wind. But behind the scenes, NASA's story wasn't always so heroic. There were secrets, warnings ignored, internal battles no one saw, and disasters so devastating they shook the entire world. Today, you'll hear the story NASA never wanted to repeat. The story of how small decisions, political pressure, and ignored voices led to the darkest days in the history of space exploration. The sun hadn't even risen yet on January 28, 1986. But the phone lines were burning inside a small office at Morton Thiokol. A team of engineers argued desperately with NASA officials. The temperature at Cape Canaveral was far below freezing, colder than any shuttle launch before one engineer, Roger Boisjoli, slammed his hand on the table. "If we launch tomorrow," he warned, "people will die." It wasn't a guess. It wasn't a fear. It was a fact. The shuttle's O-ring seals, thin rings of rubber no thicker than your finger, became stiff in the cold. And if the O-rings failed, the shuttle could explode. NASA responded with silence, then pressure, then frustration. Delays meant bad publicity. The Challenger carried Krista McAuliffe, the first teacher heading into space. Millions of school children were waiting to watch the launch live. NASA needed this launch to happen. By the end of the night, the engineers were overruled against their own instincts, their own warnings, and their own conscience. The launch was approved. The next morning, millions watched as Challenger lifted into the cold sky. 73 seconds later, a bright flash tore through the air. 7 lives were gone. While the world cried in shock, the engineers' prediction echoed through history. It was going to happen, and they knew. 17 years passed. New shuttles launched. New missions flew. NASA promised to never repeat the mistakes of Challenger. But on January 16, 2003, it happened again. Not with fire, not with a dramatic explosion, but with a single piece of foam drifting softly through the air that changed everything. During liftoff, a chunk of insulation broke off the fuel tank and smashed into the wing of the Space Shuttle Columbia. It wasn't loud. It wasn't spectacular. It was quiet. Engineers watched the footage again and again. Something was wrong. They knew it. They begged managers to order a satellite photo. High-resolution images that would reveal the damage. They were denied. "It's not a safety issue," they were told. "Foam hits happen all the time." But this time was different. 16 days later, Columbia began its re-entry inside. The astronauts prepared to come home, unaware that superheated plasma was slipping into the wing through a hole created by the foam. As the shuttle crossed over Texas, sensors failed. Temperatures spiked. Pieces began breaking away. Then a breakup across the sky. A trail of burning debris stretching for miles. Once again, ignored warnings led to unimaginable loss. NASA wasn't just facing another accident. They were facing another truth. History had repeated itself. Long before the moon landing, before the iconic footprints in the lunar dust, NASA faced its first nightmare, January 27, 1967. Inside a sealed Apollo capsule, astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee were running a routine test. The capsule was filled with pure oxygen, a spark waiting to happen. Inside, wires were frayed. Velcro was everywhere. Flammable material surrounded the crew. For months, Concerns had been raised, and for months, nothing was done. During the test, a spark ignited. Fire burst through the cabin in seconds. The astronauts tried to open the hatch, but the design made it nearly impossible to open from the inside. They never stood a chance. The fire wasn't just a tragedy, it was a message that nearly killed the entire Apollo program. The disasters were the moments the world saw, but the warning signs started long before. The public never knew how close Apollo 13 came to becoming a disaster. All it took was a single oxygen tank, modified against the manufacturer's warnings, to nearly kill 3 astronauts in the deepest parts of space. They didn't know that NASA once lost a $327 million spacecraft because one team used metric units and another used imperial. They didn't know how often engineers complained, or how often their voices were pushed aside by managers racing against political deadlines. NASA wasn't evil, but it was human. Too human. And every time safety clashed with schedules or budgets, the universe had a cruel way of reminding them of the cost. NASA eventually changed. Not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Challenger forced them to restructure. Columbia forced them to rebuild. Apollo 1 forced them to rethink everything from the ground up. Space exploration became safer, more transparent, more cautious. But the scars remain. Behind every launch, every mission, every success are the ghosts of the past. Warnings carved in steel, lessons written in fire. Because the story of NASA isn't just about reaching the stars. It's about the price paid along the way. Mistakes changed NASA's structure with time. And currently, they are working much more carefully. You listen this story from Stories of Crime World. What do you think about NASA's changes over time? Please leave a like and subscribe to our channel.